Order!
Khianakat. Uvlepakukot kanyaktu dilang nelitita. Kamanakana kawit nalungin niya kawit atanek. Hibun neok nektot atanek etotun hibun neok tilugi. Ilwit angalalugi. Pekpang naktamik ay cholugi. Umihut ay chomik wani katimop kahalit kitin. Avan mun okakoming isotun okakomaut atanek. Ilibit kinalun niya kawit. Ilingon kanya tu tataramik wagutahin tapitaw raguti kayo ko tuptaw. Ulupakahin kanok ikayo tikramik ay tsok hemakota. Iswatan ikayo ko maibot inuit hanakalibot. Hilalibot kihulaka mane inyune aktot. Ukwatahin afaktilaw taligit sumaitin inyune lauta. Tikrangin niya kitamat ko at angalachik kaming inyawaralani. Inuit, kinyapayak at anikalibit nalungid niya kapko iling ng kanyo aktot. Jesus at kagon, apaypin. Amen.
Colleagues, I'd like to thank Lillian Elias for the opening guiding words. It's greatly appreciated and sets the tone for the day. On a personal note, I'd like to thank you guys for yesterday for your indulgence with me as I had to leave and deal with my my son who had an accident, and to the infrastructure staff in Fort Providence, the RCMP detachment, and the Fort Providence Health Center. You guys did an amazing job, and I have to say thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Colleagues, let's get to work. Minister statements. Minister of ECC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss a significant issue affecting the Northwest Territories, the historic low water levels that have been observed over the entire Mackenzie Basin. Over the last 4 years, we have seen extremely variable water levels, likely related to climate change. From historic highs in 2020 and 2021 to record lows in 2023-2024. In this time of unprecedented variability, we are committed to giving residents, communities, and stakeholders the best information and tools we can to inform planning and decision making. As the ultimate downstream jurisdiction of the Mackenzie River Basin, we are also working with neighboring jurisdictions to ensure shared waters of the basin are managed in a way that maintains the ecological integrity and aquatic ecosystem. Current water levels in the N.W.T result from a number of factors. In the last 2 years, over the entire Mackenzie River Basin, including high temperatures, low rainfall, and high evaporation rates. The consequences for residents and communities have included disruptions to marine transportation, reduced hydroelectricity production, and visible changes to aquatic ecosystems. To inform the decision and planning of N.W.T residents, communities, and stakeholders, the Government of the Northwest Territories proactively provides up-to-date information. The Department of Environment and Climate Change closely monitors water, snow, and meteorological conditions and publicly shares important monthly and annual updates, including N.W.T water monitoring bulletins and the annual N.W.T Spring Water Outlook. During the spring breakup period, there is a risk of flooding, and the department also provides regular, almost daily spring breakup reports. Staff are also working with academic researchers and federal scientists to better understand how climate change and increased variability is expected to impact Great Slave Lake and the Mackenzie River in the future. Mr. Speaker, communities at risk of flooding in the N.W.T are very interested in understanding how more variable water levels may impact their community risk of flooding. In the 10 N.W.T communities that are at high risk of flooding, Environment Climate Change is working with Natural Resources Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs and the Department of Finance Geomatics Division to create new flood inundation and flood hazard maps. Preliminary flood inundation maps, which can be used to inform emergency planning, have already been developed for Hay River, Katla-Diche First Nation, Fort Simpson, and Aklavik, and are currently being updated based on the review and input of community leadership. Mr. Speaker, current low water levels serve to remind us that water in the N.W.T are affected by conditions in upstream jurisdictions. The Government of the Northwest Territory actively negotiates and implements transboundary water management agreements with neighboring jurisdictions in the Mackenzie River Basin. These agreements play a critical role in protecting the quality, quantity, and aquatic ecosystem health of waters flowing into the territory. Our ongoing collaboration with the Yukon, British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan through bilateral transboundary agreements and the Mackenzie River Basin Board underscores our commitment to protecting our shared waters. These are venues by which we can expect early and effective engagement, notification, and sharing of information on developments and activities that might affect the ecological integrity of the aquatic ecosystem. Mr. Speaker, through data analysis, research, information sharing, and partnerships, the Government of the Northwest Territories is actively working to address the challenges low water levels currently pose for residents, communities, and stakeholders. We are committed to safeguarding our water and supporting community resilience in the face of environmental change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister ECC. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member statements. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday my honourable friend opposite the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs spoke to the need to go for residents of the Northwest Territories to follow trusted sources when emergencies occur. And I think that is one thing we need to be very mindful of, is trust in government. When I talk to constituents, friends, and family, many of them tell me if there is another state of emergency, they'll be reluctant to follow orders to evacuate. And I think that comes to the fundamental issue here. If citizens do not trust in their government to take care of them during an emergency, what do we have to do to restore that trust? A motion was brought forward in the last sitting of this House to establish a public inquiry that passed in February 22nd. Since then, we have had we've seen the establishment order, a draft establishment order tabled on the floor of this House, but what we have not seen is the efforts of the government to bring forward an after-action report. Residents of Yellowknife, at least, have seen their city take on an after-action report through an independent contractor. Many people have been interviewed and many people have gone to public engagements, but they're still waiting to see what this government is going to do. We have not heard an update about when the after-action report is going to come forward. The Premier has been silent on this issue. And I'm hoping today we can get some clarity on this and we can see how far the government has come along to restoring trust. Because at the end of the day, if we are in an emergency, and a life or death emergency, and this government is not someone the public will respect enough to listen to, we will have an even worse crisis on our hands. We have to get this right, We have to respect our citizens, and we have to ensure that there's transparency, fairness, and accountability over how last year's crisis was handled. And I hope that the Premier will have good answers for me so we can move forward together on this. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Member from Range Lake. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I want to share a story about healthcare staffing that's a good news story for a change, our family medicine residency program. Since 2020, the program has accepted 2 doctors in training each year. They train as residents in Yellowknife with mandatory rotations to Inuvik and Nunavut. This is Canada's first ever family medicine residency training site north of 60. It's a partnership between the University of Alberta and the 3 local health authorities in the N.W.T, and the program was developed with advice from the Indigenous Advisory Committee. It includes critical education on the importance of cultural safety in healthcare in the N.W.T. So having these family medicine residents present in our system has decreased appointment wait times for some teams by as much as 60%. It's improved primary care screening and helped us continue offering medical services at critical times like during the height of the pandemic. As of summer of 2024, 6 residents will have graduated from the family medicine residency program. One of the very first graduates was YK North constituent Thompson Daunt, who is Métis and born and raised in Yellowknife. Importantly, all of the graduates have gone on to practice medicine in the N.W.T. That is because young people who spend time living and working in the N.W.T. for an extended period of time, and they get involved in community life and the diverse cultures and experiences the territory has to offer, are more likely to identify themselves as a northern physician and want to stay here and work. So a very defeatist narrative that keeps popping up is that we'll never be able to fully staff our healthcare positions locally because healthcare workers just don't want to live in the N.W.T. Mr. Speaker, that is just not true, and this program shows that. The N.W.T. Family Medicine Residency Program is one of the most popular residency programs in Canada. It has been very successful at attracting students. It even won the Premier's Award for Excellence in 2021-22. The N.W.T. Medical Association recently wrote a letter to ministers recommending that we work towards expanding the family medicine residency training program from 2 to 4 residents per year. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to conclude my statement. I was so close.
So close, but not there yet. Getting better. The member from Yellowknife North has asked unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Any nays? No nays. Member from Yellowknife North.
Okay, so expanding the program would help ensure a steady pipeline of new northern trained physicians who understand our system and our patients into our healthcare workforce. So I'm eager to see this government heed that call and build on this shining success story. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member from Great Slate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to talk about how we communicate. I'm going to talk specifics. The Northwest Territories Emergency Plan from April 2024 has an Appendix B, which is the Emergency Communications Protocol. One sentence on page 6 of the protocol reads, "Within this model, departments and agencies are expected to implement their own communications tactics based on their own business continuity needs during an emergency." Mr. Speaker, I'm hearing general concern that this will give N.W.T. departments the leniency to silo themselves in future disasters down the line. It's also a concern that coordinated communications only comes into effect during the state of emergency. As we all saw in 2023, coordinated communications is crucial before the state of emergency to better speak to concerns and help maintain public confidence in times of uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, for many, it was felt that there was no certainty on who to get key information from in the government. It was incredibly frustrating having to jump around between department websites looking for relevant information. Even the new improved public safety page manages to maintain silos. It's just links to separate websites. I think the N.W.T. tends to forget that the general public does not know how the government operates internally, and it's not reasonable or realistic to expect the public to know details regarding which department is responsible for what functions. A page of links that directs you to another list of links is a nightmare for anyone, let alone someone with limited literacy skills. The N.W.T alert page is a great concept, but so far, the execution is lackluster. When media asked about it at the first wildfire season briefing with the Premier and wildfire staff, the question was not truly answered. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Great Slave. Member statements. Member from Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the past weekend, I had the opportunity to have preliminary discussions with the principals of Buffalo Airways. Introductions to stakeholders on the Sawtooth resupply is as important as the plan itself. Mr. Speaker, we can no longer deny the reality of low water levels, only minimizing repercussions of it. To bring into perspective, Mr. Speaker, last fall's barge delivery to Fort Good Hope seen a top-up to the winter road resupply season of 600,000 litres of fuel. Mr. Speaker, January the 8th, 2024, Sawtooth seen the cost of aviation fuel delivered to Norman Wells an emergency carryover to the heavy tanker winter road season delivery at a cost of $1.75 per litre. This amount cost to Norman Wells was $1 million. Now adding further costs to transport the product onto Fort Good Hope, if it's the same volume as last year. Mr. Speaker, this is only one of many products, essential cargo destined for the Sawtooth. The Mackenzie River communities of Fort Good Hope, Norman Wells, and Toledo rely totally on the affordable Mackenzie River marine transportation. We have 5 grocery stores, schools, and health centers within these communities, and commercial projects, certainly an endless list of customers and clients. Mr. Speaker, MTS canceled the 2024 sailing season. The government of the Northwest Territories, an ambitious resupply plan, and in collaboration with Buffalo Airways Air Barge, we cannot afford to miss the boat. Mr. Speaker, in the Sawtooth resupply, is the Sawtooth resupply an emergency one? Myself recognizing this, I cannot emphasize enough the extreme magnitude of this situation, and more importantly, the immediate need for a sound logistical resupply plan. This approach is a short-term one. What is our government's long-term one? My conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I foresee the immediate need and critical need.
Member from the Sawtooth. Your time is up. Oh, thank you, member from Sawtooth. Member statements. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, MACA has recently released a new emergency plan which seeks to better clarify roles and responsibilities for the N.W.T, NGOs, and municipalities during emergencies and evacuations. I appreciate the department's work on this, and having read through the plan, I acknowledge that it is clear about roles and responsibilities. However, in terms of current reality, I think there is still a fair bit of work to do to figure out the fine details of how this plan will work on the ground, particularly in relation to local emergency management organizations. I also understand that some gaps still exist that we need to address, particularly who will be funding emergency response capacity building for these organizations and who will pay for and coordinate evacuation of one community to another. It is worth noting that the overarching assumptions of this plan were established in a time when community evacuations were relatively infrequent. That reality is changing, Mr. Speaker, and as evacuations and emergencies due to extreme weather increase, I think we need to step back and reassess whether we have all the pieces in place for this plan to work, or whether changes to the plan or increased resources to implement it are needed. As has been discussed extensively in this House, many of our communities, particularly our regional centres identified in the plan as host communities, are underfunded. They don't have additional capacity to take on the responsibilities laid out in this plan, either for building up capacity to respond to emergencies within their boundaries or to host evacuated neighbours. The plan speaks to how communities should look to local businesses and contractors where necessary to expand capacity to respond. But again, building capacity within those businesses to be able to answer the call will cost money that communities don't have. With regard to hosting evacuees, I think we need to step back and assess whether this really is something we can download onto local EMOs, or whether we need to be seeking federal funding to establish and resource reception centres for the regions. Mr. Speaker, I believe we can identify a path which works for communities and the territory, but I don't think it involves leaving municipalities to do this work alone. We need to fund communities to build and maintain emergency response capacity. We also need to work with municipalities to identify how regional evacuation hosting is going to work and openly acknowledge that they can't take on that task alone. I'll have questions for the Minister at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Frame Lake. Member statements. Member from Nunavut-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as brought forward by my colleagues in this House several times over the past week, the transition of Aurora College to a polytechnic is in jeopardy of not reaching some of its milestone commitments. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we must ensure that we continue our commitment to this important work. One of those commitments, Mr. Speaker, should be to fund the Centre for Learning, Teaching and Innovation, an initiative that the Aurora College brought forward during the transition process. And Mr. Speaker, this program provides expertise to develop new quality control programs that will ensure the college meets the quality assurance requirements to become a polytechnic. It will allow the college to develop Made in the North programming, Mr. Speaker. This important work was started through funding through Canor, but unfortunately that funding has come to an end. Mr. Speaker, there was a transition team, as we're all aware, consisting of N.W.T employees, senior employees and college staff. But, Mr. Speaker, once the new legislation was introduced and the new Board of Directors put in place, this team was deemed unnecessary by this government. This team was funded, Mr. Speaker, through the surplus budget of the Aurora College, but this funding has also been exhausted. I can't help but think, Mr. Speaker, that if we continue to fund this important transition work, either through additional funding allowing the college to have the necessary expertise, or through continuing the transition team as it was initially designed, the milestones we're hoping to accomplish would be more attainable. Mr. Speaker, if you're a jet all the way. And if we want this transition to be a success, we must commit to it. And Mr. Speaker, that will have to come with funding. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, member from Nunavut-Boot Lake. Member statements. Member from Mophie.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'm going to be talking about drugs and crime. Mr. Speaker, today I want to talk about the increase of drugs and crimes in the N.W.T. It is disturbing to acknowledge there is a rise of homicide in the N.W.T. right now related to drugs. There is more violent crimes, and the RCMP acknowledge the link between drugs and the unprecedented number of homicides that have occurred. I want to offer my condolences to all the families and friends who have been impacted by drug crime in our territory. There is one, I do send my condolences to the families in Betchakon that are affected by this as well. And there are, we're having a service today. Mr. Speaker, we see the RCMP is trying to respond to these crimes and illegal activity. When dealers are arrested or charged, parents and grandparents are so relieved and so happy. Mr. Speaker, this is what we want to see. We want to see the RCMP take control of the drug trade in the N.W.T. We want our communities to be safe. We want our children to grow up without being influenced by fast cash and addictions. Mr. Speaker, the drug trade is destroying the lives of our people. Our people are being shot, assaulted, abused, and intimidated. When are we going to stand up and let drug dealers know that N.W.T is not a place to do business? Right now, there are homicide cases linked to drug dealing with no updates. And in other cases, when charges are laid, they get off on technicality. Drug dealers come to the N.W.T and prey on our vulnerable people. They take over people's homes and set up businesses in the N.W.T, which leads to more crimes like theft and assault. It leads to more addictions. It leads to more destruction, trauma, chaos. Mr. Speaker, people in small communities are scared. Our communities do not feel safe. I am very concerned about communities without an RCMP detachment. N.W.T Chief and Council had to take it upon themselves to remove a person who was known to be selling drugs. Okay. Mr. Speaker, can I have unanimous consent to conclude my statement?
Member from Mophie is asking for unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Seeing no nays, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without a consistent RCMP force, drug dealers can easily take advantage of small communities. This rise of drugs and crime is debilitating our communities and our territory. Mr. Speaker, who runs this territory? We need to make laws and take actions today because right now in the N.W.T, the drug trade is winning and our people are losing. I will have a question for the Minister of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Mophie. Member statements. Member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2023 fire season, I stood in front of the House here and thanked all first responders in the Northwest Territories, including YKDFN and Tsuut'ina First Nation, for protecting our homes and community, and I'll thank you for your continuous service. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I spoke about emergency planning and the devastation caused by a recent fire in Fort Resolution. There is certainly much to discuss in this Assembly regarding community administrative situation, but today I would like to revisit those events to highlight how well we all work together despite the circumstances to save lives and to protect homes. I want to start off by thanking the ministerial colleagues, MACA Minister and the ECC Minister, for doing their best to gather and deploy all the resources they could promptly and effectively at a moment's notice. I want to thank the local community leaders, N.W.T First Nation Chief Louis Bosley and Fort Resolution Métis President Arthur Beck, for all the work they've done in those organizations' effort as well. I also want to thank the Housing N.W.T Minister as well for helping getting those displaced families into temporary housing quickly. I want to thank the first responders, Deputy Chief Fire Chief Louis Bosley, Firefighter Jessica Sanderson, Captain Joseph Odia, Brayton Lafferty, and Lieutenant Sam O'Reilly. I also need to thank the Hamlet staff, Dave Pirro, Don Pirro, Louis Jericon, Derek Cross, Lynn Merce, Jack Merce of the N.W.T Highways, as provided the community with vital support, as did the staff from ECC, including Scott King, Greg Lafferty, David Cardinal, Stanley Hunter, Joe O'Reilly, and of course the helicopter pilots who rushed to the scene, and Mr. Speaker, including the RCMP in Fort Resolution. I also appreciate the Northern Store, the N.W.T store, for their donation of water sandwiches. I know Vanessa Sanderson, Kirsten Bushy, and Erica Lafferty brought food and water to the first responders as well. The health center also did a great job assisting those who were injured fighting the fire. So I want to say thank you to all their staff as well. While the community is devastated, this disaster shows us once again the bravery of our first responders and the unlimited compassion of ordinary community members. It was, Mr. Speaker, I seek the unanimous consent to conclude my member statement.
Willity, member from Trinidad-Willity is seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Seeing no nays, member, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. While the community is devastated, this disaster shows us once again the bravery of our first responders and the unlimited compassion of our ordinary community members. It was also an opportunity for these different levels of government to show how they can come together to meet any threat to the safety of the Northerners head on. Thank you all for this hard work and dedication to making the North safer place. And thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member from Tunde Willady. Member statements. Member from the Date Show.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the last sitting, I did several statements regarding health, wellness, and health promotion by our government. My statement today will be similar with particular focus on health promotion in schools. Mr. Speaker, it is critical that our government support the healthy learning and development of all our young people within every school across the N.W.T. Our government needs to ensure that our future generations develop skills and education necessary to have good, healthy lives as they develop from adolescence to adulthood. Mr. Speaker, as our children and our youth go through our education system, from kindergarten to high school, we need to instill in them such things as the importance of healthy, well-balanced nutrition meals, and about the dangers of harms of drugs and alcohol use, and to ensure they have sports and recreation so they stay out of trouble. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we need to ensure that students feel supported in terms of mental health. There is a vacant school counselor position in my region right now. It is very important that our government works to fill those positions as soon as possible to ensure the students there have the mental health supports they need whenever they need it. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, if a school is lucky enough to have a counselor, high turnover rates for such position makes it difficult for students to feel motivated to seek help, because it makes it that much more challenging for students to establish a rapport and build a positive therapeutic relationship with the counselors. In closing, Mr. Speaker, as a government, we need to ensure that all students in every region are supported physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. We must do more to help our students thrive and help lead them into futures they are proud of to look forward to in life. I will have questions for the Minister of ECE later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member from the Date Show. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, midwives are more than just baby catchers. As a matter of fact, they provide counseling, they provide information on pregnancy, sexual health, they order tests, they provide order ultrasounds, they do pap smears, prescribe medication. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on. Mr. Speaker, they also provide continuing education during and after the birth. Mr. Speaker, they help with lactation consultation, infant feeding, and Mr. Speaker, they have truly become a continuation of the healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, if you're not convinced by the human side, well, maybe you're a dollar and cents person. I'm okay, I understand that. So here it is. In Alberta and in BC, they respectively have saved $7 and $60 million with the savings by using midwifery. But it doesn't just stop there. According to the Association of Safe Alternatives for Childbirth, they say they save $540 per birth. And then they go on to the overall continuation using the versus the obstetrics program. It's $2,000 cheaper. Midwives save money. Mr. Speaker, the Parkland Institute, which is associated with the University of Alberta, says you can save $1,200 per birth. And in BC, they even say over the 28-day postpartum process, it's over $2,000. This all adds up, Mr. Speaker. There's not a healthcare system that isn't evaluating itself, asking how can we do business better. Heck, let's consider midwifery. I'm a very pragmatic person, Mr. Speaker, as everyone knows. Health jurisdictions are asking themselves what's important. It's not midwifery versus obstetrics, Mr. Speaker. It's about the right fit in partnerships. There is money to be saved. Families, mothers, children receive less trauma, patient care is increased, and sometimes, if not most times, medication is decreased, Mr. Speaker. All good things. It makes you wonder why the N.W.T isn't doing more. Oh, but they are, Mr. Speaker. On page 136 of the business plans, they're actually reviewing the regulations, Mr. Speaker. If you go to the mandate, the second bullet on page 5 on the fifth bullet, it points out that they want to continue the implementation of things like the missing, murdered, murdered an Indigenous women's call to inquiry, and 7.4 of that inquiry also talks about engaging the teachings of midwifery. Mr. Speaker, I can't tell you any more than the fact it's that simple. Midwifery works, and we'll talk about why it's so important later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Yellowknife Centre. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, back in April, the Legislative Assembly played host to youth from across the Northwest Territories for our annual Youth Parliament, something I look forward to every year as we get to hear voices from youth and hear what they feel is important to the next generation. The following words in my member statement today are those that were written and read in this legislature by Kagan Ball, who represented Yellowknife South as the minister responsible for infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to talk about plans for the Mackenzie Valley Highway. The Mackenzie Valley Highway is a project that has been talked about for decades and will connect the Northwest Territories, providing the possible expansion of communities and an increased ability to resupply those communities. So far in the project, 40 of the 42 bridges have been completed, and in the coming construction season, we will begin construction on both remaining bridges. The planned distance for the highway is only going to be from Wrigley to Norman Wells, but once this project is completed, it will be expanded to cover the communities and towns all the way up the highway, Inuvik-Tuktoyaktuk Highway. This highway will give vital all-season supply routes to the smaller communities without the need to worry about low water levels where the barges might get stuck, or how the big airport or landing strip for the supply planes is to land on, and it will help with further development and reclamation of old projects and infrastructure. My main focus with this project is connecting the Northwest Territories and giving the necessary supplies and assistance to communities that are currently hard to reach without large short-term investments, such as for crews and fuel for the barges and the planes that resupply communities along the Mackenzie Valley and further. Another concern that is driving my wanting to focus on this project is climate change and how it is causing disruptions in the resupply routes through wildfire, low water levels that I mentioned in my concerns about the barges, melting permafrost damaging the airports, and more. This highway will eliminate some of the problems faced by the existing resupply routes. I know that for a few more years while we continue to work on this road, we will need to use the barges and planes to resupply unconnected communities, but the highway will connect them and eliminate the need for current methods used to resupply the communities along that route. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank Kagan for letting me bring his voice once again to the halls of this legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Yellowknife South. Member statements. Good afternoon, colleagues. Today I would like to celebrate the life of Billy Alfred N.W.T. He was born on March 9, 1968, to Henry and Bella N.W.T. He was one of 11 children in their family. Billy attended Thomas Simpson School and was one of the lucky ones who did not have to attend residential school. Billy was taught to hunt, trap, and set snares by his dad. They would go out to their cabin for weeks at a time where they would trap and bring home furs. When people spoke about Billy, they would always say that he was a hard worker who loved to be outdoors. In the summertime, he would be seen mowing the lawn, harvesting, and chopping wood for the fall and winter season. As well, you could see him in the evening or on weekends working on his four-wheeler. This was his mode of transportation to get around town and to work. Billy worked for many years at Fort Simpson Air with Ted and George. He was a fixture at the company. Passengers from the community, he loved to chat and catch up with them. Billy was very happy with his sisters every year was helpful with his sisters every year with their gardening. He would help them turn the soil, dig up the garden, and sometimes he would help plant potatoes. In the fall time, he enjoyed digging up the fresh vegetables. Billy loved his nieces and nephews as they were own children. In return, he loved him so dearly. They appreciated that he would joke around with them, and he told them great stories. One of the stories was when two of his nieces saw a skidoo and tried to start it. After a couple of pulls, it started and took off straight towards the tree. They could be heard saying, "Billy's going to be mad." So they pulled and tugged on the machine until they finally managed to get it back to where they found it. They covered and hid the skidoo tracks and took off. A bit later, the girls ran into him, and he asked them why they bumped into the tree. Then he started to laugh about it. This was Billy, always looking at the brighter side of things. Billy was an amazing man who was understanding, and when you needed a hand, he would be there for you. His family and friends are going to miss him. It is very hard to say goodbye to an amazing angel. They were lucky to have him in their lives. The family would like to thank everybody for their condolences and for coming out to say their final goodbyes. He's now with his parents, family members, watching over the family, especially the young ones. He'll be sadly missed. Member statements. Member statements. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Replies to the budget address, day 3 of 7. Reply to the budget address, 3 of 7. Reports on committees of the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports on standing and special committees. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are for the Minister of MACA. Under the N.W.T emergency plan, the Communication Incident Management Team is only activated in state of emergencies. Can the Minister speak to what coordination will be stood up when communities have urgent concerns on public safety that may not yet be classified as emergencies? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Great Slave. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many levels of emergency situations, and for that, every level has different stages that they will go in for what they're going to stand up and what they're going to need at that time. So depending on what stage it might be in, us as MACA may not fully be involved, but we'd be there to observe and assist with the department, regional superintendents, and the manager of EMO. But for the most part, at every stage, MACA will be involved to assist any community emergency, whether they fully need us or not, but for the most part, just there to be there if it's needed. So at a local emergency level, we might not be involved at all. It would just be the local community involvement, and they would be doing their own thing, as I've witnessed many times in Hay River, that not too many people outside of Hay River would hear of or see of. But when it goes down to the regional area of the Regional Emergency Measure Organization, MAC would have more involvement and the ability to step in more resources, as would the Territorial Emergency Measure Organization when it gets to that level. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister speak to whether he'd consider expanding or re-envisioning the N.W.T alert page to draw from N.W.T corporate communications or any centralized mechanism that would be able to consolidate all relevant and robust public safety information in a mobile app, like the BC Wildfire app? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Great Slave, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. MACA has been working to expand the N.W.T alerting system. They've worked with the RCMP recently for the ability for them to send out alerts. MACA is always looking at improving the way we communicate. When it comes down to a territorial emergency, right now I think we're at the stage where we're using the N.W.T alert system. There's also other apps and devices out there like Alertable, for an example, where you can set your region for your ability to pick up those types of emergencies if there is any. But there's locally, I would have to say the best resources are your local community agencies, whether it be the community government, your community emergency response teams, whatever that might be. And for that reason that's where you're going to get your experienced knowledge people for that area communicating, and those that information would be utilized also for MACA to share, or the Territorial Emergency Measures Organization to share if need be. But for the most part, when it's a local state of emergency and local EMO organization is running it, it would be the local governments like a town or a municipality doing the communication. That may not go out everywhere on like the N.W.T alerting device. Thank you.
Mr. Municipal Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Great Slave.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure that really gets at the heart of what I'm getting at, but I'll try and ask my next question, which is, will the minister ensure that coordinated plain language information, including evacuation notice alerts and orders, fire bans, road closures, wildfire perimeters, air quality measurements, which are already there, road construction, campsite closures, by way of list of a small sampling, could be made available through the N.W.T alert site? That's the new site that they've put up and stood up, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
From Great Slave. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As this is a new development central focused area for getting communication out there, the department will continue to work on it, and hopefully we can get as much information on there as we can, like the minister is the member is suggesting. And I think those are all great things. It's just a matter of working on the site to get the communication and the information on there that is needed. So we'll continue to work and develop that site to have more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal Community Affairs. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions will be related to or taking up where I left off on my member statement with respect to midwifery. Mr. Speaker, I was enjoying a good read. It's not a good read in the context of happiness, but it is a good report regarding the reclaiming power in place. It's the final report of the N.W.T. And I happen to notice a familiar name, Miss Lisa Semler, in there. So I'm sure she's very familiar with the report. But so specifically, I want to point to the page, without going into context, is it talks about the teachings of midwifery and postnatal care of women and children. So that said, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health and Social Services is, how is the Minister meeting that objective of supporting midwifery in the Northwest Territories in line with the statement that ties to the report, which also ties to the mandate, which also ties to the business plan of the government of the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad that the member, in his member statement agrees with a lot of the things that I also agree with. And midwifery is near and dear to my heart. So one of the things that with all of the things that are happening in the Northwest Territories is what we are doing is we are focusing the midwifery on the programs that we currently have. So Fort Smith was the first program. We expanded into Hay River, but currently right now, Mr. Speaker, we are barely filling those positions in those two communities where there are no prenatal services and no other services that will be providing to those members in those communities that deliver. So this is where we need to focus on midwifery, because midwifery is to be able to birth closer to home with your family and those people in those communities. That is where we want to make sure that these programs are successful. So that's where we're refocusing that area to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really glad we agree. So then I'm looking forward to the next agreeable answer from the minister when she explains the role of the Midwifery Advisory Council on how the services of midwifery are being rolled out in the Northwest Territories to serve sometimes the first choices of expectant mothers to go through that process. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also hear how the minister expresses the advisory committee's advice on how we do job postings and reaching out in recruitment of midwives. Thank you.
You member from Yellowknife Centre, I think that's a couple of questions in there, so I'm going to turn to the Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the positions that are currently in the communities are government-funded positions, and yes, I hear the member of how we would use a midwifery advisory. We have created these positions with collaborations with within the department with them. And moving forward, this is the thing: is we need to make sure that those positions in the communities that Fort Smith, like I said, and Hay River, which do not have birthing services. Inuvik and Yellowknife have birthing services right now, and so we're going to switch our focus to make sure that we can support those communities. And if it means working more with the advisory on how we do that better in those communities so that these programs are successful and women can birth closer to home in those communities. I also want to note that because we are, having a hard time recruiting for the Hay River, which that community also supports N.W.T in their prenatal, postnatal support. So by not supporting Hay River, we're not supporting N.W.T for those people to have that prenatal and postnatal support. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is when is the last time there's been any recruitments in the Yellowknife area that can support the regional centres? And again, Yellowknife represents half the population, so I'm coming back to is what is the minister looking at from a dollar and cents point of view of recruiting more midwives in Yellowknife to support community birthing options such as midwifery? Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Speaker, the more support that I put in Yellowknife, the less people that I'm going to have working in the front line that are actually doing the midwifery program. And so the support that we're leaving in place is to the one position to support the two communities to be able to be effective. If we keep taking away and we put it in Yellowknife, then that's going to be taking away positions or midwives that could be working in those communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am very curious on how the minister reconciles taking away from the communities by supporting the expansion or fulfilling the current program of midwifery in Yellowknife that supports the communities. So, Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain exactly how that takes away from the communities? She keeps saying that by not supporting the Yellowknife midwifery program. Thank you.
Yellowknife Centre, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is still a position to support the two communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Nuvik-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my statement, I spoke about the importance of the transition of the Aurora College to a polytechnic. Mr. Speaker, I spoke about the funding for the Centre for Learning, Teaching and Innovation that the college have been doing for the past 3 years. My question is for the Minister of EC&E, wondering if her department would consider funding that centre to continue the important work they're doing. Thank you.
Member from Nuvik-Boot Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. So the Centre for Learning, Teaching and Innovation was established in May of 2020, closed in 2023. That centre was actually funded by CanNor, a project through CanNor. As far as I am aware, there has not been any additional funding through CanNor that has been given to the college for this centre, and I, as Minister, have not received a request for additional funding for that centre for Aurora College. It's not something that we could fund from dollars from within at this time. But if I were to receive a request, it is either something I could work with the college on, either supporting them through negotiations with CanNor. CanNor has been very generous in their diversity of programs they have supported in the Northwest Territories, or I can have a conversation with the chair about what funding is required and if they even want to reopen the centre. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Nuvik-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that. I can tell you the funding, I believe, was in the neighbourhood of about $500,000 per year. They did apply, but did not receive the continued funding from CanNor on that program. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I've also addressed in my member statement the actual transition team and the important work that team had been doing up until such time as the Board of Directors were put in place, understanding now that the college is an arm's length organisation, but still much important work that we could do as a government to assist them. Would the Minister consider funding a transition team either with the college, allowing them to get the expertise they need to continue this work to get back on track, or as a combination with N.W.T employees as well? Thank you.
Member from Nunavut Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the transformation team for Aurora College was in place until 2023, at which time it was disbanded. At that time, in the life of the transformation, the $1 million that I've been speaking about with members on the floor of this House this week and last week was agreed to by ECE senior management along with Aurora College senior management to be used for the purposes of transformation. And that's where it's at right now, is that Aurora College was going to use those dollars for that purpose. As far as putting the band back together again, that's not a request I've received from the Board of Governors for Aurora College. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions, member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Yes, I'm aware of the $1 million in funding that was received. It was received and was used to be used to develop the new Bachelor of Education program, which hasn't been rolled out yet. So what the college has been using that funding for was to develop the General Studies program, which will eventually then turn into years 1 and 2 of the Bachelor of Education program, if I'm not mistaken, the social work program as well. So that's what that $1 million is currently being used for. My question is, and I believe the transition team, that budget was around $3 million per year, I think a little over $2 million in salaries for expertise and O&M. So would the Minister consider a request from the college to again look at funding that over and above the $1 million that's given for the Bachelor of Education program?
Member from Nunavut Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely welcome any conversation with the college about supports that they need in order to continue forward with transformation, which is a key part of their mandate and a key part of the mandate document that was agreed to between Aurora College and the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment of the day. That mandate document expires in July of this year, and I have no doubt that transformation will continue to be a key part of that mandate document. And therefore, given that for the last 6 months, we've had a great working relationship. I happily have had a great relationship with the chair for many, many years and intend to continue that. So by all means, I welcome any dialogue whatsoever. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary, member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister. And listen, I know the Minister is passionate about this project, as we all are. One final question, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister commit to, given that I said in my statement that the timelines are delayed, they're going to miss some of the milestones that was originally laid out in the Gantt chart, I think that we've all seen, to where they want it to be. Can the Minister commit to tabling where they are and how those milestones have changed? Thank you.
Boot Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, absolutely. I think that that is something that will need to be publicly shared and reflected. I think it's also important that we reflect on the good work that has been done by the Aurora College transformation team as well as Aurora College. There are a total of 80 deliverables in this transformation, of which 66 of them were completed by the Aurora College transformation team. And since Aurora College has taken over, they've continued on along on those milestones, and they've completed an additional 3 milestones in the last few short months. And so good work is still being done on that. And so I think it's really important that we also celebrate our good milestones as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Colleagues, we're 18 minutes in. 3 people have asked questions, so please shorten your answers so we can get everybody through the process. Thank you. Oral questions. Member from the Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I emphasize the critical state we're in on the the low waters here and the shipment down the Mackenzie River. My question is to the Minister of Housing. In this new fiscal budget, can the Minister confirm the list of housing units destined for the SA2? Thank you.
Thank you, member from the SA2. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What Housing N.W.T. can confirm related to the cancellation of the MTS barge to Toledo was that there was one new duplex scheduled for delivery into Toledo for the 24-25 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from the SA2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that question. Moving on to my next question here. On Mr. Speaker, on February the 29th here, I requested from the Housing N.W.T. Minister a housing inventory for the SA2 due to the MTS cancellation. What is the new shipping alternative plans for materials as well as new units? Thank you.
Member from the SA2, Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, the cancellation of the barge is unfortunate, so we're not able to get much of the supply into the communities in the SA2. But what we're able to do in Housing, N.W.T. has pivoted to delivering the replacement duplex on the Winter Road and looking at building it to specifications for winter road travel and shipping that unit on the 24-25 winter road season to Toledo. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T. Member from the SA2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And moving forward, there's always the cost of capital, cost of delays, so there's a factor to that, and I'm not too sure what that cost is because I'm not privileged to the materials, but I want the Minister to keep that in mind here. It may come back to haunt this government on the cost of capital or the cost of loss. All of a sudden, your sheet of plywood already doubled if it went to 6 months in purchasing, for example. My last question, an Indigenous Made in the North to the housing crisis is being proposed by the leadership of Fort Good Hope. Will the Minister accept my invitation and suggest proposed dates for the meet and greet of the leadership in Fort Good Hope? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from the SA2, Minister of responsible for Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to MLA McNeely for the invite. I've met with Fort Good Hope, the Kashno-Gotene Housing Society, a couple of times on virtual meetings, but I'd be pleased to meet with them in person. We can discuss dates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T. Oral questions. Member from the SA2.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can the Minister answer my half portion of the last question? Proposed dates. Can the Minister come back to me and propose dates? Is it next month or July or August? Thank you.
Thank you, Member from the SA2, Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister of Health suggested 2027, but it will be definitely sooner. We'll talk over the next day or so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Housing and N.W.T. I'm glad you didn't take the Minister of Health's advice there. Member statements, oral questions. Let's go to that. Member from Wolfie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to let the young people know the drug dealers and cartel do not care about them. With that in mind, the RCMP have been noted in the media saying they need a response unit. How can the GNWT support the RCMP to respond to the increase in drugs and crime with a response unit? Thank you.
Thank you, Member from Wolfie. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't quite know what I can say here. I know the budget is before the Committee of the Whole, so I don't want to speak too much about it, but I look forward to that budget passing and us getting our crime reduction unit up and running. Thank you.
Premier. or Minister of Justice? Minister Murphy, or Minister Mo. I'll try this again. I just gave you a promotion. Member for Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are communities in the N.W.T without consistent RCMP presence. Can the Minister explain what is being done to improve effective level of policing in N.W.T communities?
The Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So in the communities without RCMP present all the time, there are RCMP who are dedicated to travel to those communities at regular intervals. And with everything that's gone on in the past few years, I guess 4 years now, the intervals might not have been as regular as we would have hoped. But at the Betchico detachment, there are 2 officers who are dedicated to going into N.W.T. In addition, the RCMP have taken new approaches to combating the drug trade. We've seen the increase in drugs over the last 4 or 5 years, and because of that, the RCMP have sort of adjusted their tactics, and we have seen since last year a big increase, 30% increase in arrests, almost twice as many charges laid, over twice as many drugs seized, taken off the street, a number of dozens of handguns seized. So a lot of work is happening to prevent drugs from getting into communities, and also we have those proactive patrols into communities. And that being said, there's more work to be done. I have more initiatives that I want to bring forward, work with the federal government on them, so there's a lot more work to be done on this. Thank you.
Member for Murphy.
Mr. Speaker, he's very right in all the stuff that he just said, but N.W.T needs a detachment. Okay. The RCMP have also noted publicly there is an inability to hold offenders accountable. What can the N.W.T do to assess the RCMP to hold offenders accountable? Thank you.
Member for Murphy, Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So one of the big issues now is that over the last number of years, in the late 2010s, there were changes to the criminal code. There were decisions from the Supreme Court, all of which have resulted in people who are arrested not being remanded into custody, but granted bail, and they're arrested, they're back out later that day. And some of these offenders, they are innocent until proven guilty, but then they're arrested again the next day or the next week, and they continue this pattern. And so we are seeing that that deterrent of not being remanded is not working. So what I have been doing, along with all of the other ministers of justice and many premiers across Canada, have been lobbying the federal government for bail reform to ensure that we can better protect our communities. And later this year, I will be hosting all of the ministers of justice in Canada for one of our annual meetings, and this will be raised there as well. So there's continuous lobbying efforts across the country to address this, because this is not just a territorial issue. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Final supplementary. Member for Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is sad to see our young people who were once full of life now look defeated. We can just look in the YELLOWKNIFE downtown. You can see that, and even in a small community as well. So what can the N.W.T do to make it difficult for drug dealers to operate in their territory? Thank you.
For Murphy. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And me and my spouse are from the territory, and sometimes we'll run into someone who went down that path, and we can see that impact where our paths diverged and someone has gotten into that life, and it's tough. It's tough on us to see. And so I know that when it's in your family, when it's someone close to you, when you see it every day in your community, it is difficult. So this is a serious issue that we are all feeling the effects of one way or another. And so there's a number of things that we're working on to try and address this. Looking at ways to shut down known drug houses. That's one way. We want to introduce the SCAN legislation, which would allow premises to be shut down as opposed to evicting the residents. So it's a different process, another tool for the RCMP. There is the Civil Forfeiture Act, which I will be bringing forward, which will allow the government to retain proceeds of crime without a conviction in certain cases. So we are taking steps, both the government and the RCMP, to address these issues. Ultimately, I always say this, drug use is a public health issue. It's a tough battle to fight. I always look at in the United States, I think they spend over $1 trillion on the war against drugs, and they're not winning either. So ultimately, we need to work on the demand side of things, because if there's a demand, the supply will make it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Oral questions. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, how is the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs proposing to deal with the lack of capacities communities have to deal with the increasing number of emergencies within their boundaries? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Frame Lake. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So with the capacity issues within communities, the department is working with local governments to establish what more resources are needed. And if there's an opportunity for a local government to, or if there's a need for a local government for more resources, then MACA will step in and ask for more assistance or get more resources and tier it up to the point where we may need to call out to other communities or other businesses to assist with capacity issues. But for the most part, it's up to the communities to realize what their capacities are and what needs they might have. And the department's always there to assist them in building these plans for preparedness. Thank you.
Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to hear that MACA is there to kind of help communities identify, but in the interim, we're in a situation where there is a bit of a gap. So, Mr. Speaker, how is MACA coordinating with communities for the current fire season and ensuring existing gaps, particularly related to hosting evacuees, are addressed in the short term while we work on these longer-term solutions?
From Frame Lake, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am not aware of any gaps in hosting, and if there is any, the local communities need to reach out to the department to work on these gaps that the member is bringing forward. I just, during his member statement, I have access to the documents, obviously, but I went online to make sure it was on there. I word searched on the document, and I searched up something for an example like reimbursement costs, which took me right to the page, Annex A, Section 8, where it talks about full reimbursement costs. So if a local government is unsure, they could go to the emergency plan, they could resource and look at all the information that's required and reach out to the department to clarify what help could be more used from the department to assist in, for an example, hosting. Okay, so thank you.
Minister for Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. So I think the Minister has touched upon something important there, and that is that the communities currently, the way the plan is written, communities can come for reimbursement. But Mr. Speaker, this doesn't get at the issue of the cost of capacity building for communities to respond to these emergencies. So communities are in a position right now where they are taking on responsibility that I don't think was completely clear that they needed to take on. I think that was very clear during the wildfire season last year that the gap is what we saw last season. So, Mr. Speaker, is MACA doing anything to address the gap? That's what I'm speaking to right now, and that is the capacity of these communities to build up this capacity to respond as the plan is articulated, because it's assuming the capacity is there. I would argue that right now it's not. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Frame Lake, Minister for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess if the member says there's a gap, and I'm not sure of it, I don't see or hear the gaps. I only see and hear of the lack of communication and the lack of responsibility from the department. But at the same time, I'm told by my department that they're working with community governments to make sure that these avenues are all filled up and everything's being communicated clearly. So I would hope there's no gaps, and if there is, I hope the communities reach out to the department to clarify where the issues are and how the department can assist them to clarify these or clean up these gaps. I do hear what the member's saying, and coming from a community where we've done local evacuations, I shouldn't say local evacuations, isolated evacuations within a community. For an example, evacuating an island, Vale Island, to the main town, which is what we call Newtown in Hay River. We've always set up a reception center. The town of Hay River has never gone to the department for or to the territorial government for full-blown assistance other than the local government assistance. So in small little areas like that, they're always working on bettering the problems they find out from every evacuation and setting up those little processes with like evacuation centers. So that's where you start seeing the little gaps that you might be talking about, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, the department's there to assist and the government's there to assist with filling in these gaps if they're aware of them. Thank you.
For Municipal and Community Affairs. Final supplementary. Member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think for my last question, I'd like to say, let's imagine a scenario where a community comes to MACA this summer and says, we don't have the capacity to host other communities, but other communities, local EMOs are saying they're going to be evacuating to that community. So how is MACA going to manage that situation if a community is telling them, we don't have the capacity to host?
Member from Frame Lake. Minister for Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would hope no community would turn away any other community for assisting them in an evacuation. And I would hope that a local community would reach out to the department in assistance in hosting evacuation or hosting another community. But that being said, I know other communities have reached out to other between communities reached out to each other to assess and set up evacuation centers based on their evacuation plans, which has no involvement of the departments, especially MACA. They've done that on their own, but there is that assistance from the department if need be. So I hear what the member's saying, but at the same time, I don't think there should be that neglect, or I don't even want to call it neglect, but the wanting to refuse another community to evacuate to your area. I would hope that the communities would be willing to assist other communities in the territories. Thank you.
Minister for Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my member statement, I spoke about the importance of providing sufficient health promotion within the schools across the N.W.T. Recently, the N.W.T. began using the education curriculum from British Columbia. So I would like to ask the Minister of ECE if there have been any major changes with regards to health promotion in our schools since changing the curriculum. Thank you.
Member from Decho, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll start by saying that the BC curriculum has not been fully implemented into every grade and every classroom across the territory. That said, the N.W.T. adapted curriculum of the BC curriculum covers a broad range of health promotion topics, and these includes things like balanced lifestyles, understanding personal choices, as well as social and environmental factors, healthy relationships, and managing mental health and emotional and social well-being. In addition to the BC curriculum, Mr. Speaker, we also have our child and youth counseling program, which is our school-based mental health and wellness program in our schools across the Northwest Territories. And with the change that was recently done, that started in this school year, there was the addition of that promotion and prevention piece within our schools, and it provides all of our schools and our school boards the autonomy to design programs that work for what they need to respond to in each of their region to make sure programs are specific to the challenges those students are having. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from the Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that response. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister tell me if the youth councillor position has been filled in Fort Providence today? Thank you.
From the date shown, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an interesting one where when we break down silos and do things a little bit more together as departments, we end up sharing questions on the floor of the House as well, which I know can be challenging for everybody. So the clinical counselors that are found within communities and within schools fall under the mandate of the Minister of Health and Social Services, but I don't want the member to waste her question either, so I can confirm that while this position was filled in Fort Providence, it has become vacant, and for any further questions on hiring, that would need to go to the Minister of Health. Thank you.
Minister for Education, Culture and Employment. Member from the date show.
Thank you for that response. I will get back to the Minister of Health later on. The next question is, can the Minister tell me if there are any health promotion campaigns currently taking place in our schools, such as the Drop the Pop campaign or Don't Be a Butthead? Thank you.
Member from date show. Minister for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. So the Don't Be Butthead campaign as well as the Drop the Pop campaigns are both campaigns that are put together and administered by the Department of Health and Social Services. They have a few health promotion campaigns that are on the go right now, not the Minister of Health though, but they do have programs for tobacco cessation, healthy eating. That is something that also carries through into our schools, and MACA supplies funding for after-school snacks and after-school programs. So a bit of some kind of cross-departmental things going on. We have Health and Social Services has some staying active campaigns, sexual health campaigns, and substance use education. I would highly recommend that people use some of the material that is on the health website under health promotion. Under sexual health, before COVID hit, the CPHO declared a syphilis outbreak. That has not gone away. I encourage people to go out and get tested, and also for the cannabis and substance use, there are also tools for educators, parents, and for youth as well that are found on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary? No. Oral questions. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. First, what is the Minister's response to the N.W.T Medical Association's recommendation to expand the family medicine residency program from 2 to 4 residents per year? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I recognize the importance of the family residency program. And this program was launched in 2020 and provides a way to train and retain potential candidates for permanent family medicine positions in the N.W.T. And 4 residents have now graduated from this program. 2 newest residents started on July 1st, 2023. However, I do agree with this program, and but when we're taking in account as to ensuring the number of residents that we can support and provide, expanding their scope in our facilities, we have to make sure that we can provide that to each of the residency. And so I'll leave it at that. I'll let her finish asking questions.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So given that this recommendation is coming from the N.W.T Medical Association, which is made up of physicians operating here in the N.W.T, who would have an intimate knowledge of their capacity to supervise and train medical residents, does the minister believe that it could be realistic to aim for an expansion of this program by the last year of this Assembly, 2027? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, unlike I'm not going to commit to that onto the floor today, as I'm unable to be able to confirm whether we could meet that funding and clinical training requirements, as I mentioned in my previous comments. But I'm committed to continue to work with what we can do to expand this program, and if there's ways that we can find other funding to fund this, if we can support it within our system, then I'm always willing to commit to continuing that work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
To Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that, and one positive aspect is that the program is partly funded by the University of Alberta and other partners, so I look forward to the Minister's analysis on that. One final question here. Does the Minister see any opportunities to transfer lessons learned and the successes from the family medicine residency program to offer additional on-the-job training and residency opportunities within our healthcare system? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, I really want to appreciate the member for bringing this forward and in a positive way, because this is a good thing for the Northwest Territories. But I'd also like to recognize this is just one program. There are a number of areas that we have been doing, increasing health practitioners as well. So educating registered nurses in the Northwest Territories for over 20 years. We've been graduating nurses, licensed practical nurses, personal support workers, ophthalmology technologists. And we hope to again soon be able to bring back social work, educating social workers in the system. But I believe there's an opportunity to continue to grow our ability as to educate health and social services professionals in the Northwest Territories, and I will be working with my colleague to ensure that we can continue to support these things, because these are ideal for the Northwest Territories. When we work together to be able to train people in the Northwest Territories, we're more likely to keep them in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Oral questions, member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will do my best to not break your rules today, but I'm going to go back to what I was asking the Minister of Health and Social Services yesterday. My first question is whether or not the Department of Health and Social Services has asked Indigenous midwives about what would support the growth of midwifery in the Territory, specifically in our smaller communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slave, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess with the midwifery program that we're talking, I can't speak to what has been done over the 20 years, but I know that Fort Smith was a driver, and the history of midwifery in Fort Smith has been kind of the model. So as to when and where, what discussions have happened with Indigenous midwives, I don't have that information here on the floor today, but like I said, midwifery, I mean, we want to be able to provide this service where there's no service available to deliver. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member from Great Slave.
Thank you to Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. I realize these are last-minute questions, and I appreciate that. I hope she can get back to me on maybe some of the history of what the department has done to talk to Indigenous midwives. My next question is, why have midwives not been considered in the recruitment and retention strategies that have been applied to nurses and physicians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Great Slave, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that detail. Recruitment falls within HR, and whether it falls within that department, within that HR team, I'd have to defer that to the Minister, but as of right now, I mean, I can follow up and get back to the member on that whole process. Thank you.
From our Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could the Premier update this House on the status of the after-action review of the 2023 wildfires? Thank you.
Range Lake, Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this is a long story. So going back to February, of course, we sat in this House and there was a request for a public inquiry. That came after the decision was made to hold this extensive after-action review where the department would go out or hire a contractor to go out, look at everything that happened in terms of the 2023 fire season response, hold public meetings, speak with staff, and then generate a report with recommendations. Because there was a desire to ensure that this was not influenced by government, the idea, it actually came after a meeting I had with the mover of the motion and the seconder, the MLAs for Range Lake and the Decho, as well as the chair of the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight. We had a discussion, and from that, I left the meeting and we put together a proposal of creating an oversight committee comprised of members appointed by Council of Leaders, Standing Committee on Accountability of Oversight, and the Government of the Northwest Territories. That work has been done. Those appointments have been made. Their role is to actually evaluate the RFPs and choose the contractor that will undertake the work. This will ensure that the government is not hand-picking the contractor. Once the contract begins, that oversight committee will ensure that the contractor is not influenced by the GNWT. All of the reports will be given directly to the contractor or to the oversight committee before the government to ensure that there's that the contractor's report is not influenced, and those reports will be shared with the three bodies who appointed members. So the RFP assessment process by that oversight committee is underway, and we hope to award an RFP next week or the week after. Thank you.
Mr. Premier, oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my preference, of course, is a public inquiry. I still think it's the way to go. I appreciate we are joining the Premier in this process for now. How long until we get this final report and we can see what the contractor learns from the emergencies last year? Thank you.
Range Lake, Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And one thing I knew coming into this assembly is that I wanted to work in collaboration with the relevant partners. And the other thing I knew coming into this is that collaboration takes a long time. And so if we would have just gone ahead and issued the RFP as government and managed the contract that way, we would have been a couple months ahead. But as it is, once the contract is awarded, there will be 6 months until the final product is to be delivered. So we are looking at a final report in December. Thank you.
Mr. Premier, member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if there is this report, now we have a draft. We have a draft order on the table, so to speak. The public can see it. Members can see it. If this after-action report is ultimately found lacking by members of this House and members of the public, is the Premier willing to call a public inquiry? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake, Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to get into hypotheticals as it's not in line with the rules of the Assembly, but I look forward to seeing what comes of the after-action review, and we'll make our decision then. Thank you.
Mr. Premier, final supplementary, member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the contractor undertake public engagements in every affected community or every community that was evacuated during the 2023 wildfires? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have the list of communities at my fingertips, but the engagement will be robust. I'm happy to get back to the member with that information. Thank you.
Mr. Premier, oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Yellowknife Women's Society commissioned a report regarding the over-policing of Indigenous women, and a lot of the, if you read the report carefully, I'm sure the Minister of Justice has read it, cover to cover, as they say. But one of the things they underscore is the fact that, the women feel they're over-policed, and statistics probably prove that to some degree. Mr. Speaker, but the problem is there's no other reply or response to stepping up to the need when they're called, because the RCMP cannot ignore that phone call. So, Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Justice, who's probably familiar with the overall context of the problem, is what other options are there to redirect the need when you run into a problem with someone's intoxicated or under some types of drugs or influence, other than sending the RCMP to continue care of the individual until they sober up or deal with whatever they're dealing with? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the idea that women in Yellowknife and generally people in the N.W.T are over-policed, there could be some validity to that, given that we have more RCMP per capita than anywhere else in Canada, twice as many as the Canadian average. So there definitely is a lot of policing. The RCMP also receive many calls from the shelters. If one of their clients is violating one of their policies, they will often call the RCMP to come and deal with that. So the RCMP do get those types of calls. They have turned into sort of the catch-all for every issue that arises. And I know there's a better way to do things, because the RCMP have other things to deal with, other than basically addictions and public health issues. So in Yellowknife, I know there's the street outreach. In other communities, there's nonprofits who similarly work with people who might be experiencing issues. But I think that going forward, the future in the territory is going to have to involve some other collaboration between healthcare professionals and the RCMP for some of these issues, perhaps, whether it's social workers. I'm not quite sure at this point, but I'm very open to exploring other avenues, because having the RCMP, who are there to enforce the criminal code, having them deal with people who are just too drunk in the middle of the day, that's not a good use of their time, and it's not the best way for those people who are being arrested to be treated either. It's not an ideal situation, but unfortunately, it's the situation that we're in here, just given the way that things have evolved. Thank you.
Mr. Justice, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the fact that the minister, I should say Premier, has a broader sense of the problem, and I can also appreciate the fact that we all might agree that RCMP may not be the best solution for a lot of cases here, including hospitals and whatnot. Does the Premier, is the Minister willing to look and investigate into alternative task force to partner with the RCMP to ensure that these people are cared for to the abilities of and responses they require, which often isn't jail? Thank you.
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to I don't want to say that we're going to develop some working group to look into these things, but what the member is talking about is the way I think that we need to go forward. This government is integrating services. We have our homelessness strategy, which is really looking at how we can better support people who are experiencing homelessness, what sort of wraparound supports we can provide, how to better provide those supports. So that's the type of work that we are doing moving forward. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Mr. Speaker, would the minister be willing to provide some type of response to me before the beginning of the next session in the fall? That will give the department enough time to come up with some options and ideas that we'd be able to look at as a broader picture as a response to the issue. Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to sit down with the member, maybe have a conversation, maybe get a written question, just so I know I'm clear on what we're discussing. I wish I could just say, you know what, we do have things in mind. It's a matter of resourcing and all of that in order to get into fruition, but I'm happy to have a further discussion with the member. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Oral questions, member from Mofui.
Mr. Speaker, this is for the Minister of Justice. So has the N.W.T considered legislation that would increase security at the border can we prevent people who are on bail in other jurisdictions from entering the N.W.T? Thank you.
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Build that wall. I'm just joking, of course. The territorial border, it is a, it is a border, but in Canada there are mobility rights. We can't just stop people at the border and search their vehicles. There was a time when it was easier to do that, but unfortunately, we don't have that ability. So what we do is we work with the RCMP, I suppose, undertakes investigations. They tried their best to stop drugs before they come into the territory. And I always say, we need people to bring information forward. The RCMP need credible tips to act upon. So I recommend that anyone with that type of information reach out to the RCMP. If they don't feel comfortable reaching out to the RCMP, reach out to Crime Stoppers, and you can provide that information anonymously. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Justice. Member statement or oral questions. Member from Mophie.
Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the minister to make N.W.T. great again. Mr. Speaker, in small communities, okay. Mr. Speaker, in small communities, many parents are complaining about young people on income support. The young people are not buying groceries by paying off debts to drug dealers or drug dealers waiting for them on income support day outside Northern stores. So I want to ask the minister, how can the GNWT support the RCMP to reduce crime associated with drug trades? And that goes with harassment and vandalism and thefts. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Mophie. Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when I was answering the members' questions earlier, I spoke about some of the initiatives that this government wants to undertake and provide additional tools to the RCMP. But ultimately, this starts in the community. When I've heard of communities really getting past their drug issues, it's been at the grassroots level that has driven it. And so, public safety is in our mandate. Dealing with this issue is in our mandate. So I look forward to working with the Indigenous governments, many of whom have a very strong interest in this area as well, and I've had many conversations with, and with the members of this House to figure out how to tackle these issues and better support our residents. Thank you.
Mr. Justice. Oral questions. Colleagues, time is up. Oral questions. Oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Return to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for PUB, Public Utilities Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to table the following documents. The annual report, Northwest Territories Public Utilities Board for the year ending December 31st, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Public Utilities Board. Tabling the documents. Tabling document. Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd wish to table the following document. Follow-up letter for oral question 127-20-1, Policies and Future of Housing, Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing N.W.T. Tabling the documents. Tabling document member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a letter from the Union of Northern Workers to members of the 20th Legislative Assembly on the use of agency nurses in N.W.T. healthcare. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slave. Tabling the documents. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table a letter from the Northwest Territories Medical Association regarding their submission of the N.W.T. Medical Association in response to the call for submissions for Restoring Balance, a fiscal sustainability strategy for the 20th Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Notice of motions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I give notice that on Thursday, May 30th, 2024, I will move the following motion. Now therefore, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Cam Lake, that the Legislative Assembly recommend the reappointment of the following individuals to the Northwest Territories Human Rights Commission. Ms. Miriam Burrows of the town of Fort Smith for the term of 4 years, and Mr. Charles Dent of the City of Yellowknife for a term of 4 years. And further that the Speaker be authorized to communicate the effective date of these appointments to the Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Yonley Centre. Notice of motion, notice of motion. Motions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas table document 94-20 brackets 1 2024 to 2028 business plans has been tabled in this House, and whereas 2024-2028 business plans require detailed consideration, now therefore I move, seconded by the honourable member for Nuvik-Boot Lake, that table document 94-20 brackets 1 2024 to 2028 business plans be referred to Committee of the Whole for consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Range Lake. Motions in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion has passed. Motions? Motions. Notice of motions for first reading of bills. Notice of motions for first reading of bills. First reading of the bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills, second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole and bills of other matters. Minister Statements 4-20 brackets 1. Minister Statements 5 brackets 20-1. Minister Statement 17-20 brackets 1. Minister Statement 24-20 brackets 1. Table Documents 93-20 brackets 1. Table Documents 94-20 brackets 1 with the member of HO, or sorry, no, Ehende, no, Tunade Wellady. There, let's try that one. Tunade Wellady in the chair.
I now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of the committee? Member for Nuvik-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We wish to consider table document 94-20 brackets 1 2024-2028 business plans in Committee of the Whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does the committee agree? Thank you, committee. We'll proceed with the first item. Thank you. Thank you, committee. We'll take a short recess and we'll resume with the first item. We'll take a 15-minute break. Okay. Okay, well, we'll start. Committee will have agreed to consider tabled documents 94-20 brackets 1, 2024-2028 business plan. I will now open the floor to general comments on tabled documents 94-20 brackets 1, and each member will have 10 minutes to speak. I'll go to the member. Any hands? Any comments? Yep, general comments on table documents 94-20 brackets 1. Okay, I'm going to go to the member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sure, I will kick it off with some comments. I will be fairly brief. We have some long days coming, and I'll try not to keep members here too late today. Listen, the business plans are great. I mean, I don't know what else I can say. I think there's a lot of excellent work done in there. I think this is...
These are plans.
Except,
you know, could I have been a little more aggressive in some areas? Absolutely. And I guess we can all say that about our ridings and individual things that we want to see action based on the business plan and things that are in here. But yeah, overall, it's a great document, and I appreciate the work that the departments did putting it together. It's a bit of a read, but certainly it's yeah. So. You know, I can point to specific things that I'd like to see, but Mr. Chair, I'll save those for when we go through the main estimates, as we will be going through by department. I will be referring, as we know, the main estimates are annual, and this is our 4-year plan, which again I appreciate. And yeah, and I'll speak to individual departments at such time when we go through the main estimates and talk about and refer to some of the great work that's been done in this document. So other than that, Mr. Chair, again, thank you. Good document. Let's get her done now.
Okay, I want to thank the member from the Nunavut Lake. Any other members that want to make general comments on table documents 94-20 brackets 1? I'm going to go to the member, a member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, as a planning document, I think this is the right kind of document for what we need out of a 4-year plan and to give clear direction to government. And you got everything in here from programs that are going to be implemented to legislation that's going to roll out to policy changes that are going to be significant. So if anyone's looking for the Bible of the 20th Assembly, it's right here, at least when it comes to the affairs or the business of governing. Where the rubber meets the road is, of course, in the actual budget deliberations that are forthcoming. And that's where we're actually going to have the opportunity to debate whether or not we think the cuts are appropriate, where we can see some changes in programs and policy. But what this is not our document. It's not a document of the Assembly. It's a document of Cabinet. And in that regard, they have succeeded. And they should be commended for bringing this forward in a tangible, measurable way. My comments yesterday about the mandate were pretty harsh, and I'm not retracting those because this is what I'd like to see. And I think we should be moving forward in this direction anytime we do forward planning at the start of a new assembly. It should be as measurable, as clear and concise as possible, so people can get a sense of where we're going and what we hope to achieve, and what the government hopes to achieve. And then we can course correct as we move forward through budget cycles, through deliberation, through debate, all that kind of stuff. But having a very clear vision of what to expect, that's priceless in a democracy, and especially a consensus government that often struggles to have a kind of a decisive vision moving forward. So kudos on the business plans. Everything else needs more work. Thank you.
I want to thank the member from Range Lake. I'm going to go to the member from Danny McNeely from Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too agree with the principles of the business plan. However, there's always room for improvements. It's a 4-year document. that really sets the direction for this Assembly and a ever-changing climate. Whether that climate is the cost of living in the small communities, the larger communities, and our territory as a whole. So realizing that, we really don't have any idea what the economic environment is going to be next year or the year after, but having the guiding principles to move forward with an updated review certainly shows efficiency of this Assembly in moving forward and capturing and addressing the many challenges that could possibly create barriers and challenges for this Assembly. We have no idea on the water levels of next year, for an example, or what the prices are going to be of fuel to generate power in our smaller communities. So those are unforeseen costs that we will face, but focusing on the principles for the next 48 months is really a challenging but a good corporate strategy to give our people the impression that yes, we have faith in our abilities to move forward, and here's our 4-year plan, and I look forward to going through the finalization. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you from the member from the Satu. Any other general comments from the members? Don't see any hands. Oh, okay, I see one there. We'll go to the member from Yellowknife North.
I actually prepared detailed notes, so it might take longer than 10 minutes, but here it is. Buckle in. Overall, I want to start by thanking the civil service for the work they put into these business plans within such a short time frame, and for the efforts that each department took to see itself in each priority, even when the link is not obvious. So, for example, how ITI might see a role for itself in promoting access to healthcare. I think each department really did try to see itself in each of these priorities. I do think that these business plans are a work in progress, and that there's still a disconnect between the intentions we set out in our priorities and the targets and measures we see in these business plans. In some cases, I see important pieces that are entirely missing. In other cases, the objectives are not ambitious enough, and too often the targets are entirely process-oriented instead of being outcome-oriented. For example, the target is the number of meetings held instead of what is actually accomplished in them. So I'm going to go department by department. Here I go. I'm going to start with ECE. I appreciate that the ECE targets are for the most part specific and measurable. However, one gaping absence in the business plan is a goal related to basic education and literacy, and that should be linked to the economic foundation's priority, because it's fundamentally how we build the workforce. So I would propose we add an objective that says improve literacy and numeracy outcomes amongst JK to 12 students. Now, I appreciate that the department should not be telling teachers which methods they should be using in their teaching, but we need to set concrete goals and expectations around literacy. I note that there is a contradiction between a goal stated in this business plan to maintain or increase uptake in the small community employment support program when we are at the same time seeing cuts in the main estimates to this. We'll speak more to that later. I support the commitment to work with ITI and N.W.T partners to advance plans to transition the diamond mine workforce, but ECE does not specify any targets or measures on this one, saying it first wants to consult with partners. I have to say I find it rather astonishing that at this late stage of the game, ECE still cannot define its role in terms of transitioning the diamond mine workforce. I think there's been a lot of work with partners, and I think we're ready to know what the actions are to move forward. In terms of the giant mine remediation project, the proposed action is to continue to participate in the project, and yet the logic is that will somehow lead us to meet or exceed the employment targets, even though they haven't yet been met. So I would question that logic. And similarly, ECE commits to work with the mining sector and G&W.T departments to make northern hiring requirements more clear. And the idea is that will lead to increases in the number of northern residents hired and trained. I think that there's some analysis missing here in terms of what actions will actually lead to our desired outcomes, instead of just continuing to do the same things we've been doing and expecting that that's going to give us different results. And finally, for ECE, the objective around access to health care is to focus on health promotion and preventative care in schools. So I agree that there's a place for this. I'm just concerned that the pendulum has swung too far away from recognizing the benefits of offering mental health counseling in schools, and we're exclusively focusing now on prevention and promotion, given that I don't see objectives mentioned at all in terms of clinical mental health counseling in schools. And I do think schools have a role in facilitating that. So now my comments on ECC. While some of the targets laid out by ECC are meaningful, my main comments in this one are pointing out that often the measures are too process-oriented and somewhat meaningless. So the target of we're going to participate fully in the integrated resource management regime, I would argue, doesn't say much. So on this note, I am begging all departments, please don't waste resources collecting or reporting on data such as number of files we post to an online portal or the number of routine meetings we hold. I don't think that's useful, and so I would beg you not to collect that data. One important objective is the efficient and timely regulatory review and EA processes and decision-making. But disappointingly, once again, the measures seem to be process-oriented, such as the number of reviews that the department participates in, the number of processes coordinated by the department. But what we need is evidence that improvements are being made. On this, ITI's business plan is more helpful in terms of identifying goals, actually completing regulatory initiatives identified by the Mackenzie Valley Operational Dialogue. So these two business plans need to be dovetailed and aligned. I also see goals around completing and addressing recommendations in the 2025 environmental audit, which leads us to wonder what happened to the 2020 audit and why aren't we establishing goals to implement those recommendations. In terms of supporting communities to access public land through individual parcel transfers and bulk land transfer processes, so ECC is promising to, and I quote, initiate all processes for land transfers, but clearly we're hinting here that there are some barriers to completing them. So I think we need to be more upfront about identifying those barriers and how we propose to address them, how the government proposes to address them, such as if there's resources needed for land surveying or changes needed to legislation. Some indication of that needs to be in the business plan so we know how we can move forward. Okay, next, Executive and Indigenous Affairs. So a significant new role that EIA is taking on is to lead G&W.T efforts to support NGOs to secure sustainable multi-year funding. That's great. The catch is that all the actions seem to involve helping NGOs get funding from other parties, third parties. Even when NGOs are delivering core social services on behalf of the G&W.T, yet they're still expected to cobble together funds from the federal government or private charitable donors. And so some of the actions identified, I would argue, are not helpful in many cases. So in many cases, NGOs don't need guidance in their funding submissions to other parties. They don't need more meetings. I think they would rather, honestly, just take the money and just give the money directly to NGOs instead of having all those meetings and trying to help them with funding applications to other people. I think a more useful action in this regard would be to commit to implement the recommendations of the report, strengthening the nonprofit and charitable sector external advisory committee report that was tabled near the end of the last assembly. Okay, and in terms of the homelessness strategy, which EIA is also taking the lead on, there's a large disconnect here. So I appreciate that EIA states its goal is to implement this strategy. That's great. But the actions that it proposes will get us there are focused on putting together 5 teams of staff that are co-located and setting up regional committees. So that on its own is not going to solve homelessness. And I think we could all admit that. But I think these business plans should instead just adopt the goals and the measures that are already laid out in the homelessness plan itself. We've already got the targets and measures provided, just adopt them, work them in to these business plans. And finally, in terms of EIA, in the list of departmental highlights, I would say that the project that sticks out like a sore thumb is the OneGov project in terms of its disconnect from our core priorities. I would venture a guess that no one in this room campaigned on the idea of consolidating N.W.T websites. So I would strongly question the urgency and the cost of this project. On to finance. One action that I think is missing here in terms of addressing our labor market challenges is that we need to address our extremely long timelines for hiring. I've heard that we often lose out on good candidates because our hiring processes take much longer than anywhere else. So that's something that tangible that we could put into that plan. Other than that, I actually think the targets and measures are well thought out for finance, and I'm encouraged that the department will advocate that all proposed initiatives undergo a macroeconomic policy framework lens review. The problem I see is when the Department of Finance has other lenses it's requiring departments to consider, like the government renewal initiative, the fiscal sustainability strategy, that can sometimes be in conflict. And I could perhaps conclude if I was given a second chance, if others let me at a later time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I want to thank the member from Waikiki North. I'm going to continue on with round 1, and then I'll come back to the member to conclude her statement. Is there any further general comments from the members? We'll go to the member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, let me just get organized here. So, yeah, I'm going to try and keep it to 10 minutes, but similar to the member for Yellowknife North. I mean, we are talking about a very large document, so it's hard to go through all my comments on it in such a short period of time. But I want to speak kind of generally to it and then speak to some of the things that I would have liked to see in there and maybe some things that I would like to advocate to be put in there. So first of all, have we established measurable targets? I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are areas where they are clearly measurable. There's dates established, but in many cases, targets simply say literally TBD, or the goal is quite vague, or as articulated by the previous speaker, goals are process-oriented, number of meetings as opposed to outcomes-oriented, and so we need to look back to the SMART goals principle. Are we setting goals that really lay out what we're trying to achieve? Have we been focused? Are we focused on our priorities? When I look through this document, I'm a bit less confident about that. I will say that the process of having each department speak to the priorities shows me that the government is thinking about the fact that we need kind of a cross-departmental approach. And I really do appreciate that, because I know that there's been criticism in the past of siloing amongst departments. So I really do like seeing that every department has found ways to see themselves in the priorities of the Assembly. And I think that is really positive. The question is, are we being particularly focused and strategic in terms of actions that we're taking to achieve those priorities? Are we trying to do too much? I would say I'm a bit less confident about that, just noting how big of a document this is. So I'm going to go try and go through department by department with some things that I would like to see. I'm not going to speak to all of it because, of course, that would take many hours. And, you know, I'd love to ask some questions, but I think we talked about, AOC brought forward, you know, the idea of perhaps reviewing the business plans in more detail. And I think that is something that we're still talking about. And I would love to see us do a kind of a more fulsome review of the business plans as part of our process, because I recognize that this document is incredibly important to the work that staff are doing and to achievement of the priorities. So I really do think we need to be focusing on this and not just the numbers in the budget. So let's go to department by department. EC&E first. The grow and enhance mandate commitment. So I appreciate that the government is kind of speaking to some legislative targets, but I would like to see the government establish clear targets for Polytechnic University implementation. Whether or not they're going to be investing in a Yellowknife campus, which has been stated as a need, and how the Polytechnic University implementation is going to go forward. The college has been said that they need housing, so there's a lot that's not contained in here that needs to happen in order for this project to go forward, and my colleagues have been speaking to that, and I've been speaking to that in the House, the importance of focusing on that project. So I'd like to see more in the business plans on that. And I also think that we need more of a focus and targeting of JK to 12 education. We touch upon it, but I don't see a strong statement in here of where we are, what the current conditions are, where we would like to be at the end of this assembly. So a goal of progression towards something better than what we've got now. I think we recognize that this is a critical need in terms of building up people and the workforce in the N.W.T, but we haven't really addressed it in the business plan. So I'm going to move on to, oh man, ECC. One of the mandate commitments is encouraging private investment in housing. One item I'd like to see added to the business plan here is working to eliminate overlap with municipalities on land management. So not simply processing applications, but eliminating the overlap, replacing overlap with policies about how funding is to be used to address concerns about land mismanagement, but rather than kind of managing the lands within municipal boundaries, simply setting policies and expectations and letting the communities take on that role as most other jurisdictions do. Further to ECC, increasing investments in certainty. I would let the business plan speaks to the 2025 environmental audit, but doesn't speak to the current environmental audit, which I would note many recommendations from have not been implemented yet. So ITI also speaks to the Mackenzie Valley operation, or sorry, I'm going too quickly here. So I would like to see ECC establish targets for implementation of the 2020 environmental audit and prioritize actions based on implementation time, start getting them done in order. Just noting that I would expect that many of the recommendations from the 2025 audit, recognizing that many from the 2020 haven't been done, will reiterate the recommendations. So let's get moving on it now as opposed to waiting until 2025. I would also note that ITI speaks to the Mackenzie Valley operational dialogue in their business plan, but it's not spoken to in ECC's, but it's worth noting that ECC is responsible for many of the MVOD recommendations. So I see a bit of a disconnect there in terms of where the department sees itself and where ITI sees itself with regards to regulatory. I'm going to jump very quickly into MACA. I realize that it's at the end, but I'm just going through my notes in the order that I made them. I would like to see MACA, similarly to ECC, work to eliminate overlap with municipalities on land management, and I'd like to see them implement a new formula funding agreement for communities. There's lots of talk about underfunding of the communities. I think implementing the new formula funding agreement is the fair way to address that problem, so I'd like to see that addressed. Man, does the time ever go quick. Moving on to EIA. Land claims. I have mentioned previously, but I think that we're not being particularly ambitious here, or at least we don't appear to be. I realize that they need to work with partners and there's more to this item than the GNWT, and they don't stand alone on this. But I just want to emphasize the importance of land claim settlement to the First Nations involved, to our territory, and I want to see the department prioritize getting these claims done as quickly as they can and coming to the table to the parties saying, what do we need to do to get these claims done? What do you need from us? Let's get this done, as opposed to dragging it out indefinitely. Similar to the member previous to me beat me to it, but I would also like to see an implementation plan, timeline, and costing for implementation of strengthening the nonprofit and charitable sector report. And I would like to see us commit to and fund NGOs with core funding. And I want to speak to this one a little bit, just that I think often in the past, we've seen G&WT's answer to things tends to be, what can we do? What can the G&WT do to solve this problem? And it tends to result in staff growing. We've seen the government grow at a virtually exponential rate over the past number of years. And I don't think that we're thinking about the fact that we need to be thinking about what the government can do in terms of funding others to help them grow their sectors themselves, as opposed to the government doing it for them and taking the funding that could be going to them and using it for staff. So that's a shift in the way that we do business, and I know that the mandate speaks to shifting the way we do business. I think that's a key way. I could speak to that quite a bit more, but don't have the time. The health department, I'm going to try and be quick. I've got a huge number of notes here, but I will just say with health, I'm quite happy with the business plan in this case. I like that they're focusing on primary care. The one glaring omission that I don't see in here is the issue of management and human resources at NTHSSA. There's been lots of talk, agency nurses, the issues that nurses are facing on the front lines. I'm not going to reiterate them here, but I don't see a concerted plan in these business plans to address these issues, and we've been hearing from frontline health professionals for years now that they are approaching a breaking point. They may feel that they're at the breaking point. We really need to address this problem head on. Moving on to ITI. I appreciate that they are talking about laying out an economic vision. What is missing right now is the W's of that, the who, what, where, and why, what the timeline is for it. I would like to see us establish a timeline and say when it's going to happen, because it relates so closely to all the work that we're doing, and I think that having a vision is really key. I note that I'm out of time, Mr. Chair, so I'm going to stop there and hopefully have a second opportunity to finish up my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Member from Frame Lake. Before I go to the next speaker, I just want to make a little comment here. Members, I just want to remind everybody to wait for their light to come on and before speaking. And when you're done, if you could just say thank you as well, so that it will give a much clearer picture to our technical staff and for people watching as well. I'm going to continue on. Is there any other members that want to make general comments? Okay, I don't see anybody else. I'm going to go back to the member. I'm going to go back to the member of Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the second stab at this. So in wrapping up my statements on the Department of Finance, I think it's really important that we put a macroeconomic policy lens on our decisions. What I was trying to say is that the Department of Finance also is asking departments to put a fiscal sustainability lens on things, and sometimes that can be in conflict, in that if I was asked, I could either consider a rigorous macroeconomic policy framework or just find a few things to cut that will be noticed by the least number of people. I would definitely choose the second option. But moving on to health and social services. There are a lot of important actions in here that I support. In particular, I appreciate the commitment to clarify and redefine roles and responsibilities for HSS corporate support and program and service delivery between the department and the health authorities. That's a really important step. I would note that the actions listed under recruitment and retention strategies mostly focus on recruitment. Retention still seems to be this black box. So that's where the healthcare task force that I mentioned yesterday could fit in nicely. Also, in accordance with another of the N.W.T. Medical Association's recommendations in that March 1st letter that I tabled today, the business plan should include the objective of establishing a healthcare workforce plan. So that would build on the physician workforce plan that was completed in 2020, but that has not actually been implemented yet. To put things in perspective, we currently have 310 unfunded positions within NTHSSA and 52 unfunded positions within the TCSA. And that's not necessarily the fault of the health authorities, because we don't have a clear idea if we're allocating funds for the services we want or we need to provide, whether our staffing models actually meet those needs, and where medical travel would be cost effective and where it would be better to provide those services locally. That is a real in-depth analysis that I'm not sure anyone within the health authorities have had the time or resources to do, and I think it's important we set ourselves on that path. On to ITI. So in contrast to the macroeconomic policy framework being proposed by Finance, I see the ITI business plan committing to basically increase the number of people and organizations funded in every sector imaginable when you look at the targets and measures. And yet we're not increasing the funding pots. So that leads me to conclude that we're proposing to just reduce funding amounts and sprinkle it around more thinly to more people and businesses and organizations. To me, that doesn't seem wise or sound according to economic principles. And I'm not sure that we always want to simply increase the number of, for example, artists or filmmakers that we're funding. I would argue we need to increase the value of the income, the employment, and look at increasing value as opposed to just the number of people we're funding. And finally, with ITI, again, we have a goal of a certain number of lower emission infrastructure projects or climate resilient projects in N.W.T. parks. They've picked a number of 10. So I, again, would focus on the value for investment, GHG reductions, not simply on the number of projects. Moving on to infrastructure. My first main point here is that I don't think we can continue to advance all three of our major infrastructure projects that we've had on the books for a long time. We just need to pick one. It just hasn't worked to keep our fingers in all these pies and kind of play coy with the federal government on stating which one's our favorite. I think we need to come up with clear criteria on how we're going to evaluate what's most important and urgent based on this Assembly's priorities and just pick one. Sounds simple, I know it's not. The business plan for infrastructure is strangely very silent on energy policy, which worries me, and specifically the role of the N.W.T. in directing NT energy with clear energy policies that will lead us through an energy transition to keep up with the rest of the world. I do appreciate that there's a policy initiative to issue some policy direction to the Public Utilities Board, so that's a good step, but we also need to extend policy direction to NT Energy and NTPC. I would note that the renewed energy strategy is due to be released by the fourth quarter of 2025-26. I would argue we need it sooner. We've already had the consultation complete and a draft what we heard document. I think we need to move forward on some of the recommendations in there, including developing a short, medium, and long-term roadmap for our electricity system. Justice. Just a few comments here. I note that the measures, so despite the fact that our mandate really emphasizes crime prevention and addressing social issues and addictions and things that would lead to crime, the measures and targets we've got in this business plan focus heavily on RCMP-related actions. So I don't see much that's going towards the crime prevention and social issues. So I think we need to add an action that basically states that in cooperation with law enforcement officials, we're going to build better on-the-ground outreach services and integrate teams of social and health support workers to ensure that non-criminal social issues are addressed appropriately. And I do understand from numerous statements by the Premier that that is his intention as to the approach that he wants to take, so let's just state it straight out in the business plans and hold ourselves accountable to it. MACA. So there's some really weak targets in here. For example, in terms of supporting communities in developing or updating emergency plans, the measure is how many MACA is able to contact. So we need to strengthen the accountability in terms of making sure that our communities have emergency plans in place. And I think we need to rethink the value of, I think the go-to move in MACA is to run workshops for communities. And that's not always the most helpful thing. I think we need to expand our toolbox there. Okay, finally, I'm going to move on to housing, the last department. I have to say I very much appreciate the new transitional housing program for those who are returning from, say, addictions programs, so aftercare. That's a really important step. I think we also need to set some goals and targets around other kinds of supportive living facilities, including those that are focused on harm reduction, that are getting people off the street and stabilizing them. I don't see mention right now in our plan, and I think that's a really important aspect for this Assembly. I noticed one of the goals is around talking about investing in housing N.W.T infrastructure, including new construction and repairs, and it's mentioned that the goal is to spend $120 million over 4 years, but there's no context provided in here in terms of what are we actually trying to accomplish with that money? What are the goals of what's going to, what we're going to be left with at the end of this Assembly? And it's also not clear where this money is coming from. So I would like that spelled out more in the business plans. I actually really appreciated the section under housing that talks about the risks in terms of the challenges that are faced in accomplishing the goals under this business plan, and it articulates those risks really well. But there's not much in the way of identifying solutions or what we're going to do to confront those risks. So that stood out to me. And it's okay, but I think we need to be honest about this is going to be really challenging, and we need to lay out some kind of path on how we're going to start identifying solutions or ways to mitigate those risks. So that brings me to the end. Before the end of the time limit, I appreciate your patience. I really just wanted to get all this out now before we go line by line into the main estimates, but I very much appreciate you listening, and I know this is not a votable item, but I hope this has been useful and that we can move forward with the discussions in a productive way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, the member from Yellowknife North. I'm going to go to the second round of questions. I'm going to believe member from Frame Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence in allowing us an extra kind of to finish up our statements. I will try to be quick like I was yesterday. So I left off on ITI and speaking to the economic vision, and just a few thoughts on that. I think I would like to see a timeline. I'd like to see that timeline be short and towards the beginning of this Assembly as opposed to towards the end. If we need to develop a vision, if we need to be implementing a vision, I want us to be implementing that vision today, and if not today, as quickly as possible, because I think if we're halfway through our term by the time we get a vision in order, it's not going to help us be strategic in our decision making. I also want to note about that, like being strategic in our decision making, if the vision that comes back is simply that we're going to do everything, I think that we haven't established a vision. The point of the vision is that we're going to have to be focused. We're going to have to make some decisions about what we are and are not doing, the direction that we're taking this territory, and I would really hope that those decisions are based on evidence that we've collected and information that we use to make informed decisions about what's going to work, that we have evidence to support that. And I think, again, I'm just going to note in this department, a lot of the measurables in here aren't outcome-based. Again, it's numbers of meetings held. This doesn't really tell us what we're achieving. It tells us what we're doing, but you could hold a lot of meetings and not achieve anything in any of them. So what are we looking to achieve in the meetings? Again, there's also kind of speaking in the business plan to supporting a diverse range of economic activities. But again, what do we mean by this? I think that we need to be targeted and specific. There's some activities that certainly have more value than others. If we simply support everything, we're not really being strategic in the money that we're investing. We're not being strategic in the directions that we're going. Specifically in support for arts, again, I'd like to see us, and this comment stands for the way that we fund NGOs also, but I want to speak to the arts specifically on this. I'd like to see us shift to more of an ecosystem-based approach to our thinking on how we're funding the arts. Recognizing that the number of artists or organizations funded doesn't actually tell us anything about the health of the sector, return on investment that we're getting, and recognition that arts is about culture also. It's not just about kind of growing industry, but that in some cases, successful arts organizations are able to leverage a lot of federal funding, and that's not necessarily based on sales, it's based on the activity and the cultural heritage that they're developing. So I think we need to take a bit of a more holistic view at the arts, and just note that you know, actually, I'm going to save my comments for a member statement about the ecosystem approach, but just noting that core funding for organizations is how we build up sectors. If we're just funding individual artists all over the place, we don't necessarily build the sector in a way that makes it sustainable and self-sustaining and gives us that multiplier effect of the way funding can be, the return on investment can be increased. I'll share some short comments on infrastructure's business plan. As the previous speaker mentioned, we're being urged to pick a project. I think this is a wider discussion, but bottom line, I just want to note that there is a big disconnect between what we are saying we're planning to do and what we have the fiscal capacity to implement. And I feel like I'm, of course, preaching to the choir here. I mean, the government's been telling us this since pretty much day one. But have we really stepped back and looked at some of these projects strategically and the work that infrastructure is doing and said, you know, we're going to be strategic and focused about what we're doing? Or again, are we kind of trying to keep a number of things moving? I think that is a conversation that we have to have. I think also it's worth noting that a lot of these projects kind of have a very long timeline ahead of them. And we have mines, you know, the closure of mines is coming in less than 2 years. I mean, the downturn in the economy is coming quickly, and I think it's fair to say that none of the projects that are currently in the hopper are things that are going to immediately stimulate activity in the way that I think is being hoped that these infrastructure investments will make. So I think that we need to be kind of looking in a strategic way at that also. I mean, are we maybe trying to do things that are too big? Do we need to be focusing on the smaller pieces? And again, as I noted yesterday, the foundation of the economy, building the foundation to ensure that we are taking the action to move forward in a positive way. I'm going to move to justice. Give me a second here. So, justice has been an interesting one for me to review, and I think there were some comments made today actually in the House, and when I was asking about this at the in-camera meeting, but I'll just refer to the House comments. So we're establishing, you know, reestablishing this territorial crime reduction unit, and you know, the Premier was saying today that we have kind of a high police to resident ratio, and I would just note that the numbers are showing an increase in crime despite that. And so what we are saying ourselves is that the approach that we are laying out here appears to not be working. And I think that we need to think about that a little bit. In some cases, you know, I'm just hoping that we're using an evidence-based approach to lay out our plans and that we are ensuring that we're putting the resources in the right place to get the results that we're looking for. Just need to switch back to my other notes here. Okay. And I'll share some short comments on housing, very high level. Looking at the housing business plan, I think when I first looked at this, and this is getting a bit into budget conversation, and so I'll save my budget comments, but I was looking at it and thinking, okay, we said that we were prioritizing housing. It's a bit difficult to see in this budget. And I understand that looking at the business plan, that the needs assessment is a key step towards obtaining federal funding for a plan. So I would like to see us, as a follow-up to the needs assessment, develop a long-term plan developed in coordination with partners and considering the federal funding that we can access, and would like that to become the follow-up from the needs assessment. So I want to see us long-term planning. And again, as opposed to kind of speaking to process in the business plan, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? We've got a needs assessment that's telling us what is needed, and so obviously I'm hoping that the outcome becomes attached to the need that's identified in that becomes the basis for our plan, and then we move forward in figuring out how we're going to fund it. And another comment on housing, you know, I made a statement about this in the House in the last session, or the last sitting of the session, and we'll just say it again here. We are simply not funding operations and maintenance adequately to maintain our stock. And I think knowing that, we absolutely need to increase this item. I think if the Assembly wants to make good on our priority, putting housing at the top of the list, this has to be on our radar. And we have to acknowledge that if we're not maintaining what we have, we're going to have an even bigger problem with how am I putting it? The needs assessment will end up kind of coming back on itself in the sense that we've identified what we need, but things are falling off on the back end. So we need to be maintaining what we have, building new to fill the gaps that we haven't filled, and hopefully holistically moving forward with our housing plan. So I'll leave my comments at that for now, Mr. Chair, on the business plans, and look forward to getting into the budget. And just to close, as I said, I do hope that we create a process and find a time to dig into these with a bit more detail, being able to ask ministers and departments questions about them and get through them, because, you know, it's a big document and it's an important document. And I think taking a close look at this is a change that I'd love to see us implement, and I think could help us with effectiveness significantly. So I do hope that we can move forward in that way in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member from Frame Lake. That was the first and second round. I want to thank the committee for your general comments. I'm going to move the. I'm going to go to the MLA for Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that the table document 94-20 brackets 1 2024-2028 business plans be referred to the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight for further review. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The motion's in order to the motion. The motion has been called. You're calling the motion, or are you moving the motion? Okay, sorry. I'm going to go to the member from Rangeley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I did want to speak to this because it is perhaps a new practice. Well, it is a new practice. So this is the first time the business plans have been tabled. And given the importance as kind of a guiding document for this Assembly, I think there is a need to do a more thorough review of the contents of them. My comments earlier today were more about the actual principle of the document and the technique around it rather than the content. So I for one, would like to do a more in-depth dive into what the government is committing to over the next 4 years, and I don't think we don't have the time to do that today. This format is I don't think this is the right format to achieve that. I do think the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight is an excellent place to do that. And I hope that the review of these plans will be in public and available to the public to see and hear their MLAs speak to what those commitments are, and also to have witnesses from the departments come forward and explain the decisions that were made. We've had a great commentary from colleagues about those specific choices that were made and perhaps how they can be improved. And I think the best way to do that is by referring this to a committee. It's going to be more work for us, but I think we're up to the task. So I do support this, and I thank the chair of the Standing Committee for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I'm going to go to the member from the Yellowknife South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My apologies. I think I just wasn't fast enough getting my hand up. Mr. Chair, just a very brief comment. Certainly, I know I'll just say for my own departments, I did find the comments today very helpful, and wanted to encourage a couple of examples, again, drawing only really from my own departments, but it was just to say, when I have my other hat on and not as member for Yellowknife South, but it is a sincere hope that the business plans can be used in the main estimates reviews that we're about to go through. Having four-year business plans was something new only as of the last assembly, and tying them to the same timing as main estimates is new as of this process. So there are some growing pains in that process. It was something that I can say directors of policy and finance from across departments were very glad to see. Certainly streamlines their work rather than spreading it across the year, but more importantly, the main estimates provides the funding through which the departments do all of the things in the business plans, including the opening sections. So not every activity of every single public servant necessarily finds itself in the mandate document of the government, but every public servant is contributing to the core functioning of every department. And that is included in the opening sections of everyone's business plans. And it's often reflected throughout some of the background work that may be going into contributing to the mandate activities that are in the business plans. So for example, again, I'll rely only on finance. To the extent that there's questions around what kinds of recruitment activities there are, there is a section in main estimates for human resources which then would be an opportunity to speak to what is happening in the human resources area and what they're doing to contribute to the mandate, what they're doing to contribute to retention of healthcare workers, for example. In finance or in infrastructure, I know there was mention specifically on the energy strategy. When the main estimates document comes forward, the Energy and Strategic Infrastructure Division has funding there, and it may well be an opportunity to ask what they're doing with their funding to advance that work and to see that it gets done quickly. So throughout, there was an opportunity here in saying that focusing on the business plans and not just the numbers in the budget. Mr. Chair, I heartily agree. And again, acknowledging this is the first time we've done it this way and acknowledging it's still a new assembly, I sincerely hope, and I hope I'm not overstepping by speaking for my colleagues on this side, that I think we all want to speak to the business plans in conjunction with the right now proposed $2.2 billion associated with achieving all of the work in those business plans. So I hope we find a way that we can integrate that, and also, of course, we'll look forward to what may come of committee's motion at Accountability and Oversight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you to the member from Yellowknife South. To the motion, any other members? Okay. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion's carried. Table document 94-20 brackets 1 will be referred to the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight for further review. Committee, do you agree that you have concluded consideration of table documents 94-20 brackets 1, 2024-2028 business plan? Thank you. Committee will have concluded consideration on table documents 94-20 brackets 1. Thank you. I'm going to thank you. I'm going to pass the mic to Mr. Hang on here. N.W.T. Thank you.
Chair, and I now move that the chair rise and report progress.
Okay, motion. Sorry. Okay, there is a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. I will now rise and report progress. Thank you.
Report of the Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering tabled documents 94-20 brackets 1 and would like to report progress and motion carried that the consideration of table documents 94-20 brackets 1 is and Mr. Speaker, I move the report of the Committee of the Whole to be concurred with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
They will indeed. I have a seconder. Member from Great Slave. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? No opposed. All abstentions? Motion passed. Reports of Committee of the Whole. Reports of Committee of the Whole. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Orders of the day, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Wednesday, May 29th, 2024 at 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, replies to the budget address, day 4 of 7, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notice of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Minister Statements 4, 5, 17, 24-20, bracket 1, table document 93-20, bracket 1, report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Colleagues, this House stands adjourned until Wednesday, May 29th, 2024 at 1:30 p.m.
Order!